that she thinks that she is a Nigerian, the only advice I would give to her is she needs to go to Nigeria and learn some manners.
Well,
Yeah.
With the recent unroyal tour by His Royal Highness the Duke of Duchess and his wife in Nigeria, instigated by the Chief of Defense Staff in Nigeria, has been initially described as their first official tour since Megxit, before very hastily relabeling it as a private tour, complete with a People magazine correspondent in tow and photographers as far as the eye can see. Not to mention all the pomp and ceremony, such as an inspection of the guard by a civilian, Prince Harry no less, and playing the British national anthem that Meghan found so traumatizing to Google and memorize. Now, this hasty change of labeling, temporary as it was, came about after Richard Montgomery, the British High Commissioner in Nigeria, stated the obvious, which is that Harry and Meghan are indeed visiting in a private capacity rather than an official one, and are most definitely not representing the UK on this visit. From where I'm sitting, they can use the word official as many times as they like. They can put on a pompous show as oftentimes as they like. But the reality is simple. They are no longer working royals. They're certainly not dignitaries or ambassadors of the UK, quite the opposite, in fact. They're more akin to traitors of Queen and now King and country. And now that we've seen the tour and seen it played out, it proved to be just as official as their American pseudo-fake wannabe royal tours, where they put on the same tired royal humanitarian cosplay in as convincing a manner as a toddler in a Halloween costume. It's really interesting to me how they keep trying to recreate an aspect of royal life that they apparently despised. We learned from books published since that Meghan in particular couldn't understand the point of royal tours, didn't know why people were showing up in droves, and was famously quoted to have said in Australia, "I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this." And for a woman who claims to be so worldly and highly educated, especially in the realm of politics and international relations, her unabashed ignorance is painful to behold. Which is why I made this video, because come now, we don't want to be as ignorant and vapid as Meghan Markle, do we? So before we discuss the most likely intentions behind this tour and other important aspects such as who's funding it and security, I thought we'd find out together the difference between this and whatever you call this. You might be inclined to think that royal tours are a relatively modern concept, given all the advances in traveling and globalization that progressively took place throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. But it turns out that royals, especially European royals, have always been quite a nomadic lot. For instance, most of Roman Emperor Hadrian's reign was spent traveling across his empire, venturing to Egypt, the Black Sea, and Britain. Henry II continuously toured across England, Ireland, and France in the 12th century, and in the 16th century, Emperor Charles V, whilst never venturing into the New World, constantly visited his realm in Central Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, Burgundy, and Low Countries. And Queen Elizabeth I, who also never toured her possessions in the New World, traveled so often across her domain that she ended up bankrupting some of her hosts, who had the financial burden of accommodating and feeding not only her, but her enormous entourage, which included members of her court, a full household complement of grooms and pages, wardrobe ladies and maids, guards, chaplains, cooks, and court musicians. On the other hand, non-Western rulers from China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam preferred to remain within their realms, while rulers of the Ottoman and Persian empires only ventured far enough into neighboring territories. With the arrival of the 19th century and its innovations in transportation, royals began to tour more frequently and ventured further. And interest in them, particularly from the press, really took off. Even back then, they were seen as celebrities. Their every move followed and scrutinized by journalists in search for a scoop. As historians Robert Aldrich and Cindy McCreary wrote in Royals on Tour, Politics, Pageantry, and Colonialism, the press had a field day when royals came to visit. Writers and readers fascinated with banquets, ribbon cuttings, and speeches, the clothing and jewelry sported by royals, and tittle-tattle about their less public activities. And this right here is perhaps one of the things that I love most about history. It teaches us that we humans have always been the same, and probably always will be. It's disappointing, but oddly comforting at the same time. The purpose of royal tours has always changed according to the political climate at the time. For instance, in ancient and medieval times, when a monarch's dominion over their land and people was tightly tied to religion and was rarely questioned or challenged, at least not openly, royal tours served as proof that the monarch was still alive, to visit battlefields abroad, to keep the masses in check, and to display their power and magnificence. Even much later, in the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth II, she would famously say, "We have to be seen to be believed." An echo of Lord Salisbury's words to Queen Victoria before her, when, after secluding herself to mourn her husband's death, Lord Salisbury wrote to her, "Seclusion is one of the few luxuries in which royal personages may not indulge. Loyalty needs a life of almost unintermitted publicity to sustain it." In the late 19th century, before the mass disestablishment of many European royal dynasties after World War I, the purpose of these tours shifted yet again. They became a tool to project imperial paramountcy in the colonies, even in those that were once ruled by an indigenous monarch, and to affirm the legitimacy and status of these dynasties, even if they were under threat. During an era where monarchs still reigned supreme throughout most of Europe, the focus shifted to what author Johannes Paulmann referred to as symbolic politics in his book Pomp und Politik, where the purpose of face-to-face royal encounters was to send strong political signals by staging a performance by monarchs who were, quote, seeking legitimation in the face of growing democratization, parliamentarianism, and challenges to the established order. On the flip side, royal tours of non-Western royals, such as the Ottoman Sultan, the Persian Shah, and the Siamese King, were often undertaken to prevent the conquest of their countries by these expanding colonial powers. But underscoring this display of imperial majesty and reverence was also a goal that is largely relevant today: to develop a personal relationship between the sovereign and their subjects by appearing in the flesh, as it were, and perhaps less relevant now, as a means of claiming their allegiance and countering any moves towards independence. Even in the era of decolonization, royals were dispatched to independence ceremonies throughout the then empire and now Commonwealth, culminating in the presence of Prince Charles at the time at the handover of Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China in 1997. So as you can see, there is a very long and colorful history when it comes to royal tours, all of which I would have expected someone like Meghan Markle to be aware of, but as she very famously made us all aware, she never had a clue. When it comes to modern day tours, aside from the fact that Britain is no longer an empire, no matter what Meghan and Harry would have you believe, the tours are largely conducted with the same soft diplomacy goals of the 20th century post-World Wars. And no monarch has toured the globe as often as the late Queen Elizabeth II, who was, and I believe still is, the most traveled head of state in history. From the United States to the then Kingdom of Libya, and from Nepal to Vatican City, the late Queen has been everywhere, including to Meghan and Harry's recent destination of Nigeria. Once as a fairly newly minted queen in 1956 for a 20-day tour with the late Prince Philip, and then again in 2003 to attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And it was in 2003 that the Queen expressly stated the purpose of her visit in a letter addressed to President Obasanjo. I hope I'm saying that correctly. President Obasanjo.
Olusegun Obasanjo has reacted to
Obasanjo. All right, let's say that again. In a letter addressed to President Obasanjo, where she described it as a, quote, demonstration of the value Britain attached to its relations with Nigeria and recognition of the country's role on the international stage. Which makes one wonder, what was the point of Meghan and Harry's tour? Well, you don't have to do much digging to figure out the publicly proffered reason for the visit. Apparently, the genesis for this trip came about at last year's Invictus Games, during a discussion that Harry had with the Chief of Defense Staff, who was there to support the Nigerian team at their first ever Invictus Games. If true, it's my opinion that Harry most likely did this at the behest of 43% Nigerian Meghan, who claimed incidentally during this trip that she was in her country of Nigeria, 9 years after claiming to be in her country of Malta, after she conned both Elle magazine and the Maltese Tourist Authority into funding a trip to Malta in exchange for some publicity for the country. They upheld their end of the bargain, but she never fulfilled hers. And why anyone would think Meghan Markle would provide good publicity, a relative unknown at the time, is beyond me. So hopefully the Maltese Tourist Authority learned a lesson there. And does anyone else find the timing of Meghan announcing her supposedly Nigerian roots and Nigeria competing the very next year for the first time ever at Invictus oddly fortuitous? To me, the fact that they've only chosen to visit Nigeria has a lot to do with Meghan's ancestry claims, which she believes serves to bolster her whole "they were racist to me because I'm black" narrative. By the way, check out my previous video, The Bigot, if you want a more in-depth discussion of that whole racism situation. And why does this whole notion of Harry having discussions with some official about something that would benefit Meghan give me a very strong sense of deja vu? Oh, that's right. As ever, it looks like they're just using the Invictus card as an excuse to prance around in public and attempt to remind said public of their former royal glory, with Meghan treating people, including children, as her props and the world as her catwalk, just as she did in Rwanda 8 years ago during another one of her humanitarian cosplays, one of her earlier ones actually. And while all this is going on, hapless Harry is stumbling around in her wake, forever in her shadow, or rather, forever a shadow, a ghost of his former royal self. Now, whether there was more to this trip than meets the eye, I cannot say. I can only go off the 3-day itinerary that they provided to the public, which really only served to confirm that they are treating this as some kind of official royal tour. What they were doing certainly didn't scream private tour. Unless by private they meant their brand of worldwide privacy tour. But I think we can also safely say that the Chief of Defense Staff, the individual who invited them, stands to benefit, stands to gain, perhaps politically, locally, from this arrangement. So it's very likely to be a "I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine" situation, which really doesn't scream royalty because, especially when it comes to modern day royals, they're not meant to benefit individually from these official engagements and arrangements. For example, they can't strike business deals or otherwise, or at least they're not supposed to. I mean, I can't say that they never do it, but officially they're not allowed, according to the Nolan principles. A fact which we know Meghan really didn't like based on her "I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this" comment, which makes me think that somewhere, somehow, there is likely either a deal being struck or money perhaps exchanging hands, or maybe it's just like Malta, just another free trip, free publicity, free narcissistic supply, you know, their kind of heaven. When it comes to the costs that are associated with royal tours, and they are exorbitant, the home government of the relevant royals, so in this instance, let's say it's the United Kingdom, is usually responsible for paying for the international flights. But then the host country, being Nigeria in this instance, would be responsible financially for hosting the royal family and their entourage. And it seems that apart from this general rule, media outlets are confirming that this is, in fact, what ended up happening in this circumstance. So, assuming this is indeed what happened, let's get some facts about Nigeria's financial situation, shall we? Very recently, in March of this year, the International Monetary Fund, a global financial organization that exists to foster international financial stability for its 190 member countries, which includes Nigeria, stated that Nigeria's economic outlook is challenging, with a staggering inflation rate of 29.9% year-on-year in January 2024, and where about 8% of Nigerians are deemed food insecure. Given that the latest population number sits at 229,152,217 people, that makes around 18,322,177 people food insecure. And given that we know exactly how stingy Meghan and Harry are, you know, these are people who use private jets by borrowing them from friends, they don't pay for it, or they ask hotels for free suites, and when they don't get them, they go stay with friends for free. That's how the whole catastrophic car chase that never happened came about. I highly doubt that they'll be forking out a single cent to fund this trip. And I can't imagine that the local Nigerians would be very happy with that.
If Harry visits Nigeria today or tomorrow, what effect does it have in our economy? Harry is coming and Nigeria is going to spend billions.
Whether the wife claims that she's part of Nigeria or not, it's not a welcome idea, because Nigeria is not a safe place. Let me tell you, there's hunger in the land.
As I mentioned in the opening, they were officially invited, which is normally how royal tours are instigated by an invitation from the host country. So logic, and also reports, dictate that Nigeria has indeed funded all the outrageous expenses of these two private citizens, a failed American duchess and an excommunicated British prince, who is now a resident of the US, nonetheless. And this includes funding their security costs, which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars over a few days in one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Nigeria ranked 144th out of 163 in last year's safest country ranking. For comparison's sake, the UK ranked 37th, placing it in the top 25% of the world's safest countries. And Meghan and Harry have the audacity to whine and complain about how it's too dangerous for them to go there with their children or alone without 24/7 armed to the teeth security. If you ever wanted any more proof of just how out of touch, how tone deaf these people are, I think they've just handed it to you on a royal monogrammed platinum platter, probably with some lemons and jam on there. So what was the point of this trip other than potentially just scoring another free trip like she did 9 years ago in Malta? Was it A, to simply grift and cosplay as royalty again and get a high out of that? B, to shove it in the British royal family's faces by showing them that they could be half in and half out and still treated like royalty? C, was it so that Meghan could take the Queen's former and very short-lived role as Queen of Nigeria? Or D, all of the above? Let me know in the comments down below what you think the answer is. Whatever it is, though, I don't buy this Invictus cover. Simply because, by observing what's happened over these past 3 days, Meghan in particular has once again shown that she couldn't care less about Invictus or the veterans that it claims to support. What I saw over these past few days is a desperate woman power tripping on her overinflated ego and self-importance, and who, yet again, as predicted, used this trip as a catwalk for her vastly inappropriate wardrobe, considering her apparent status as a royal and the locations that she was visiting, and used their people, her people, as she would have you believe, as a prop to fulfill her faux humanitarian drivel.